Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking with Dr. T, conversation on faith and mental health. I'm glad you have joined us for this evening. And I'm excited for our first episode for this fall. We will get started in about 3 minutes. Doc, you can share now.
So I believe I shared it to 3 different pages. So I push post and then it just flies and it just runs.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking with Dr. T. Thank you, everyone who has joined us on Zoom and those who have joined us on Facebook Live. We will begin in just a moment. And throughout the episode, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm following along on Facebook Live. And those of you that are on Zoom, please feel free to use the chat box for tonight. Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started. And I'm really excited about my guest tonight, my guest this fall. Welcome to September's episode of Talking with Dr. T, a conversation on faith and mental health. Tonight, I am excited to have a friend and brother in the ministry, Dr. Larry L. Anderson Jr. And I'm going to hold up. He's got a new book out. I don't know if you can see it. It's called The Pastor's Diaries. And it's an intimate look behind the pulpit. And I love this book. So it's definitely a book for not just clergy and pastors, but for congregants to understand the backdrop of a pastor's life, of a preacher's life. And we'll talk more about that throughout this episode. So I just first and foremost want to welcome Dr. Larry Anderson. Thank you for being with us tonight, Doc.
Thank you for having me, Doc.
Yes. And I'm going to read your bio, but I want to let everyone know we first met at currently Missio Theological Seminary. It's formerly Biblical Theological Seminary. And so we did some collaborative work together as part of our overlap at the seminary. But let me give you kind of a little overview, and then we'll have Dr. Anderson, Reverend Dr. Larry Anderson, talk about his journey. But Dr. Anderson is a North Philadelphia native who now resides in Glenside, Pennsylvania. The Lord has blessed him with a wonderful and beautiful wife, Kim, and 3 beautiful children, Marquise, Darius, and Gabrielle. Anderson graduated from Philadelphia Biblical University with a BS in Bible with an emphasis in Christian leadership. He has received his Master's of Divinity and his Doctorate of Ministry degrees from Biblical Theological Seminary, now Missio Seminary. Dr. Anderson became the pastor of Great Commission Church in September 2004. And this time as pastor, he has been blessed to see the congregation grow spiritually and numerically. One of his noted achievements to date has been his ability to follow the voice of God by leading Great Commission Church from the suburbs of Montgomery County into the city of Philadelphia to impact their new community with a holistic gospel. Another achievement of note is his co-authoring of the book entitled Ask Me Why I'm Not in Church. Dr. Anderson was the first African-American professor to serve on the faculty at Biblical Theological Seminary, Missio Seminary. He established the Urban MDiv program and also served as the director of both the doctoral and urban programs. He is currently on staff of the Baptist Resource Network, directing the Healthy Churches. He serves on the board for the Community Forgiveness and Restoration initiative designed to battle recidivism. And nationally, he serves on LifeWay Advisory Board, commissioned to resource churches with curriculum and training needed for ministry in the 21st century. And he is also a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And Dr. Anderson has dedicated his life to becoming a workman approved by God who can correctly handle the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15. Welcome again, Dr. Anderson.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I read your bio, and one of the things I was hoping that you would be willing to do is provide our listening audience with an overview of your journey in ministry, from your call to Great Commission to Biblical, Missio, Baptist Resource Network. So just kind of give us an overview of your journey in ministry.
Wow. Okay. Well, I grew up North Philadelphia, 25th and Allegheny. Was made to go to church like most kids my age at that time. Went to church and fell kind of in love with the Lord, but not with his church. Wasn't a fan of it, although I sang on the choir and I participated in youth ministry and things of that nature. What I did not see myself ever being able to do is be a hypocrite. So I couldn't live one life in church and another one in the streets. And so I decided to just go for the streets. And so I left church for about 10 years. And I was out and just doing me. I was doing music. I was living life. I met my future wife, who mother told her we had to get married in a church, which meant we needed to do some premarital counseling, some things of that nature. I told my then girlfriend that, as much as I like to go to church with you and do those things, I really believe the Lord has a call on my life and I can't just mess around. She really thought that was probably the lamest line she had ever heard for somebody not wanting to go to church. Ultimately, we went, I surrendered to the Lord, and she held me down for 10 years. I went back to school and got a bachelor's in Bible, a master's in divinity, and a doctorate in ministry. And she held it down for 10 years while I went to school and just sought the face of the Lord of what would you have me to do. In the midst of that time, when I was in seminary, I was asked, did I enjoy what I was learning? At which point I said, well, I appreciate it, but contextually, it's just not hitting home. I really thought I was being recruited and trained for urban ministry where I plan to go back, but that's not happening. And they said, oh, we're sorry. At the time, the seminary president was Dr. Dave Dunbar. And he asked me, so what did you expect? Him and then Dean Sherry Cole, what did you expect? And then I began to share some things. I just happened to have a class full of guys who are well known in the ministry. Dr. Dan Williams was my classmate at that time. And I went back to him, Sean Wise, Anthony Hurst, all of these guys, and like, hey, man, because I was the president of the class. And I went back and like, what was y'all expecting to get that we didn't get? And we began to list all of these things. And then I went back to the seminary and said, hey, we thought we was going to get this, a diverse and robust theology that included our voices, our experience, that valued the context from which we came from and going back into. At which point they said, we don't want you guys to leave with a bad experience. And so they asked me, who did I want to teach and what, could I design a curriculum? Now, mind you, I'm there to learn. I'm there to, I did not come there for any other reason besides to learn. But I end up designing the curriculum and recruiting professors. I just went online and started Googling who's doing it. And they brought them in and they gave them to us during our master's program. So they changed the entire last year and a half of our program, gave us the equipment that we hoped that we would have gotten. And then they asked me to stay on and help lead and direct the urban program, in which I did. Ultimately, they invested in me. They paid for my doctorate. They asked me to stay. That's how I became a professor there. Again, I went there for school. I went there to learn. I didn't go there planning to get a doctorate. I didn't go there planning to be a professor. None of that. I just
look at God working in your life, using you and working through you.
So yeah, I just went to get education, and all of that just happened. I mean, obviously God ordained, but it just happened. I never applied for any of it. At the same time, at my home church, my pastor stepped down prematurely because some things was happening in his life. And I ended up pastoring, which I wasn't expecting to do, not that soon, not during my MDiv program. So I ended up from the beginning, I'm about to celebrate 18 years this Sunday as the pastor of Great Commission Church. And I've been pastoring and working another full-time position from day one. I've never just pastored Great Commission. I was always doing another thing. And so I served on the faculty there. I was loving teaching our students. Well, the issue came in the hand when our students weren't in position to change their churches. Either they weren't the senior pastor or they didn't have the power or the relational equity to do the things that I was talking about when it came to missional, when I talk about, like my first book, Ask Me Why I'm Not a Church, this real call for us to be kingdom-minded, to be out where people are, to not spend all of our lives in ministry in a building. And so that began to take place. Students began to get frustrated. They couldn't do it. At the same time, the Southern Baptists came calling, saying, hey, we see what you're doing, because I was mentoring a bunch of students because students would follow me and wait for me after class. They wanted to talk more about it. And I ended up coming home so late. My wife was like, look, hey, you're going to need to do something about them students. And so I started something called UMP, and it was the Urban Missional Pastors Network. And I started this UMP network. And it was really started with just a bunch of students from Biblical Now Missio meeting me once a month so I can help explain what I was teaching in class.
Wow.
And that's what Southern Baptists saw. They saw me mentoring all of these pastors. They said, look here, we got about 350 of them,
right,
that's senior pastors that we would love for you to come help us make this transition from traditional to missional. And so that's how I ended up at SBC, because then it became, wow, as much as I love the students, if I could talk directly to senior pastors and help equip them, encourage them, make that traditional to missional jump and be more kingdom-centered as opposed to just church-centered, then I felt like I'd be really fulfilling my calling. And so that's how I fell in love with pastors as a whole. And I've been pouring my life into them ever since.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You and I are like-minded when it comes to mentoring, whether it's mentoring pastors, me mentoring counselors or other helping professionals. And I think of Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens and influences another through discussion. And creating doing what you're doing in the classroom, us talking with Dr. T, we are helping to sharpen each other and sharpen those that are listening tonight and those who will listen later on. So I really appreciate that. Now,
Amen.
You mentioned your first book, and I'm going to put it in the chat. Ask Me Why I'm Not in Church. And I think this is a great book. And it's interesting because it came out in 2019, but it is so relevant right now, post-pandemic. But what prompted you to write this book with Dr. Kyle Canty?
Well, It was something that we were actually doing. We always, Dr. Karen and myself, we have a love for people, for our community, to see uplift, to see change. We believe that the church is not the ending place, but the sending place, that we should be coming and get equipped and then going and being the church. And so we were doing this, we were designing this. We was out in the corners, would ask me why I'm not in church, shirts on, in order to strike up conversations with individuals, adopting laundromats and other places within our community to just show love for them. But when we came back, people started asking us, other churches, like, man, I wish my church could do that while they were seeing us out there. So, which made us say, yo, we need to put this in a tangible format so it could be transferable. So other churches, so we don't want to be the best church in the community. You know what I mean? We want to be the best church for the community. And so it's not about keeping our secrets and pumping ourselves up. It's about sharing everything that we got for God's glory. And so I believe that there's so many people who will never feel comfortable just walking into a building to see people they don't know, they never met, that they have all kinds of stereotype and preconceived notions on. But if I get these people in a building to get out and go be with the very people that you say you're called to reach, do more than invite them to a Sunday, but go actually be with them, love on them, serve them in some way, and then watch them follow you back to, well, who made y'all, who trained y'all to love us like that? Then you can get them to come back instead of just going with the cold invite as if the church is where you want them to be, as opposed to being out there with them. So.
Yeah, and what you just said, that is so important now, because having been online for the past 2 years and going hybrid, some people are not physically going back to the church. So we have to go and meet people where they are in their community. That is missional, that is urban, that is culturally competent ministry and culturally relevant ministry. So for those of you, again, we were just talking about Ask Me Why I'm Not in Church. So it's a great book that's very relevant today. But let's talk about your new book. I love the new book. When you reached out, The Pastor's Diaries, an intimate look beyond the pulpit. Talk about that book. What prompted you to write that book? This book, I should say.
Yeah, well, it really was a spirit of depression that seemed to come over pastors. This is worldwide. It was the first time in my lifetime that it felt like the entire church was dealing with the same problem. And when we were displaced from the building, people didn't know how to act. They didn't know how to respond to that. It was this idea that, our value as pastors has, we may not say it, but it's been based on how many people can you get to come into a building.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, COVID-19 comes and everybody's been kicked out of the building. Now, what are you worth? Now how do you operate when you don't see these people? And so you began to preach to a camera, and all of a sudden, the relationships that you thought was so strong, you realize wasn't. The disciples you thought that you had, you realize was church members and crowds. And then as you go to open back up, excuse me, and you see your people not coming back, you see what might have been, half full now is a quarter full. You see it as a quarter empty. You see so many empty seats, and then there's this discouragement, there's this depression that seemed to come on, where folks are like, wow, I really thought we were doing better than what we were. And so some of that was in that, in my job, my job is as the director of church health. I'm always checking on pastors and their health, their state of mind, their state of being. Because without healthy leaders, you won't have healthy churches. And so I'm always checking on them in that capacity. And I'm getting this spirit of depression that was coming across. And in conjunction with that, you started hearing about these pastoral suicides. And you kept hearing it. In 2019, 2020, you started hearing about these individuals that got to a point where they were so depressed that they took their life, and the question was, wow, how can a pastor who's supposed to know God so intimately find themselves in such a desolate place, such a dark and barren place? And I'm like, yo, I know how, right? I know how you can get there. I said, I don't think people really understand the weight that we carry, that that leads us to some very dark places.
Yeah.
And without a healthy paradigm and system for you to walk through, you can fall very low in this process. And so there was some, that committed suicide out of depression. There was others who had done something to violate their call, and they were so embarrassed they committed suicide. Now, it's interesting that somebody in the congregation can have an affair. Somebody in the congregation could fall and get caught in doing these things, and your job is to restore them. You might put them on some church discipline, but ultimately, discipline is not to punish, is to lead to restoration. But as a pastor, you don't feel that there's a track for you to fall and be lifted back up, even if it's not in a pastor, but just loved again, just restored. You don't have that same level. So when you make a mistake, the shame and the guilt is so strong. It's just like what I went to school for, what I worked for, everything that I have was built on integrity and character. And I did this thing, this mistake that anybody else in the world can make, right? And they can be loved and forgiven and repentant and walk down the aisle. But if you do it, it disqualifies you for life.
Yes.
Everything you say from that point on will be read through that lens. And that is so heavy because you're held up to a standard that only Jesus could walk through, right? And so you're held up so high to that you fall so low because of that. And out of that is what birthed the Pastor's Diaries.
Yes. And I appreciate that. And we're going to get more into the book. One, I think the timing of us talking about this, when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about mental illness, which are two different things. I want to put a plug in. All of us have mental health, right? And we can have situational issues, trauma, race over the pandemic, race-based traumatic stress, the grief and loss that you're talking about, a loss of identity and loss of role can impact a person's mental health. This month, September, is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. So we need to do a better job of talking about suicide in the church because it's an equal opportunity issue. It does not discriminate by race, gender, denomination. So I think it's really important that we have this conversation. And September is also National Recovery Month, where we're focusing on recovery and addiction, because I've seen in the research, levels of addiction increased over the pandemic, whether it is drug and alcohol, shopping because people are at home and I'm now going on Amazon and having everything delivered, the addiction of food. So we have different types of addictions. So we need to be talking about this right now. And Jesus said to the man at the pool of Bethesda, "Wilt thou be made whole?" So we got to talk about wholeness with pastors, with preachers, because who pastors are, I always say, pastors, who are the pastors personally and who are they ministerially? They don't separate. So when a pastor walks into the doors of the church, who he is personally or she is personally doesn't stop at the door. And so we have to really talk about the mental health, the physical health, the wholeness of our pastors to be able to effectively minister to those that are in the church and in our pews and in our congregation. So with that being said, I really like how the book is divided. It is divided into themes and different topics: pressure, pain, power, pride, pedestal, perseverance, and passion beyond the pulpit. Now, I will tell you, I like all of them, but my top sections, just because of my role as a counselor, was pressure, pain, and perseverance. But tell our listening audience, how did you come up with those themes?
Well, it was things that I've experienced. Baptist, we do alliteration. And so the 7 P's, when I was pledging, had to memorize. So the 7 P's just kind of came to me, but I thought it just resonated with things that we face, what we deal with. And it was topics that I felt we needed to actually address. I thought that they needed to hear it from us. We needed to share it. Again, we'll share problem and a problem. Oh, we got to get our building fixed. We got to get out. But when it comes to the pressure, when it comes to the pain, even when you talk about the mental health and talk about suicide prevention, it's such a stigma that put on there that if you're depressed and you're not spiritual enough, if you're going through something and you're dealing with emotions as a challenge, we spiritualize some things. Just pray about it. And we'll say that to a member. If you're a pastor and you're talking about depression, then that's taboo. Like how could you? Oh man, where's your faith at? It's amazing. We almost use scripture as a weapon against one another, as opposed to using it to encourage and lift one another up. And so therefore, if you're dealing with it, you kind of hide it. You keep it to yourself. You keep it a secret when you're going through that process, when you're going through those valleys. But they didn't keep it a secret in the Bible.
Right.
That's the part that's amazing to me. I mean, when you think about the Psalms, oh, why my soul are you so downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Like you're crying out like, yo, I'm depressed. I'm going through something here, so it says it in the Bible, but yet we fearful because we know we're going to be judged the moment we share that this is what we're going through.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned it's in the Bible. That's a whole nother session we can have, another talking with Dr. T. Is mental health and mental illness in the Bible? And it is in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And many of the prophets, the teachers, they suffered. And so we have to get to a point, if we are going to try to reduce suicide, we have to be non-judgmental. We have to have empathy and genuineness and unconditional positive regard, because just because somebody's a pastor or a preacher or somebody in the ministry doesn't mean they do not suffer from being hopeless or depression. So we have to have this conversation. So now we talk about these theme areas. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to all of those that were transparent, that were vulnerable in the book, and that shared their stories. And I just want to say thank you to you all for modeling what it's like to share with someone else. But also that really is what it's like when you go to counseling and have a counselor that's confidential. You're vulnerable just like that. You're transparent, but you have support, that unconditional positive regard. So how did you choose the pastors and the faith-based leaders for the book and for each of those theme areas?
Well, relationship, I was aware of things that happen in their lives, in their ministries, because of those relationships. And I leaned in, and I said, hey, here's what I'm doing. And here's how transparent I'm being. And so each of these authors, I sent them a one of my entries, what I was dealing with, how I was vulnerable in it, and said, I'd like you to share on this topic. I know you went through this. I know you went through that. And I believe others need to hear that. I think that can, possibly turn somebody around. That could give somebody some encouragement. And so they read it, they saw it. And again, that was a back and forth thing, because they're saying something, I'm like, no, that's weak. No, like I need that. I need you to go further. I need you to be more transparent than that. And I'll reject it. And they came back with it. And everyone like, I don't know if that's going, if that's going to make it. They might not make the book, But yeah, it was because of my awareness of where they've been, what they've been through. There were some things that I just felt needed to be dealt with. I know different ones who dealt with depression or abandonment or divorce, homosexuality, things that we don't talk about, the loss of a wife during ministry, the loss of a child during ministry. Me, I knew I need to talk about my battling cancer. in that process, and how I did that publicly, women sacrificing having a family for ministry, or just battling to be validated in ministry, and so, the massive power battles, like there was so many things that I just felt needed to be addressed, that I knew different individuals, went through within this pastoral fraternity. And I was like, look, we need to put this out there.
Absolutely.
And, they agreed, and they were transparent about it.
Absolutely. What I appreciate is that this was the beginning in this book of people publicly sharing their spiritual autobiography. And, I wrote a book on the importance of a spiritual autobiography. And I'm a true believer that sometimes God will allow us to go through what we go through to heal us, and then place us back in those same contexts to counsel, teach, preach to those same group of people that might be experiencing those same things. So writing a snippet of their spiritual autobiography it helps with healing. And I like what Dr. Phil Monroe, one of our colleagues at Missio Seminary, he put in his endorsement: healing begins when we can be truthful and connected to those who love us. If you are a pastor, I commend you first to read the book, then to find another pastor to share your own story. Say more about this statement, Doc, because sharing your story with another pastor, why is there such resistance?
Well, all right, we're gonna do that. Well, I mean, the truth is, unfortunately, we don't see each other as co-laborers, but as competitors, and unfortunately, you fear sharing something that might be used against you later on. You're sitting there looking at the other person. Like I said, our value, nobody gives us a report card at the end. So our value is based on when we look at our peers. Are they doing better than me? Am I doing better than them? And when you look for your validation from man versus from God, then you can't share with man what's really going on in your life. So you got to, not only have a facade in a pulpit from your members, now you got to have a facade even with your peers and pastoring. And so, I mean, I hate it, and so I blow the whole cover. I'm transparent in the pulpit. I'm transparent with their pastors. God called me. I mean, it's amazing to me that he would call me to do this, and every step of the way he has ordered, he has opened up a door for me to walk into. I know man didn't put me in, so man can't take me away. So I just don't feel the need to front for man, and I'm hoping that this book help creates a culture where we don't have to front. I'm seeing conversations take place now between our pastors. Pastors are admitting that they in therapy, they're getting counseling, and it's okay. And I think that's what we needed to know. It's okay, like to get the same healing that you're encouraging somebody else to get. You need to get for yourself. Again, we can't be healthy leaders trying to lead others when we're walking wounded. We got to deal with that, and all of us have dealt with some level of trauma, and especially ethnicity wise. Let's be clear. It's something about Black folks who just think we just supposed to just tighten it up and walk and pull up your boots, right. And that's just part of the culture. That hurt.
Right.
No.
Right.
I mean, we act like we can't say ouch, like it's just not legal to be in pain. Right. And so we deny that it even exists because we see it as a weakness. Yeah. When in reality, I think it takes a whole lot of strength to admit that you're hurting, to admit that somebody hurt you, that you're in pain, and you're dealing with that. And I think that's it. We got to deal with that. Yeah. We got to deal with grief because it hurts. We got to deal with those abandonment issues and the lack of closure and all of those things that go on in our lives. We got to stop spiritualizing like somehow this doesn't affect me, this doesn't hurt me, and then we leave and just turn up a bottle, or or we leave and look at porn. We leave and do something to try to heal ourselves and
Yes.
medicate ourselves and somehow, make ourselves feel better because somebody done made us feel, worse.
Right. Man, you're saying it, and I'm getting excited because what you're saying, most people who know me know my analogy, the Pepsi bottle. Here's the thing everybody needs to understand. Mind, body, and spirit is connected. So if something's going on emotionally, it's shaking up. And if you don't let it out, it's impacting you physically. High blood pressure,
Mm,
right? Heart disease.
mm,
You start
mhm,
having
mhm.
GI issues. Here's what people have to understand, that whatever's going on emotionally is going to manifest itself in your body physically. So you might walk around and say, I'm cool, but you got some physical health issues.
Mm.
Understand they're all connected. And then you also mentioned that some of the pastors that wrote in the book are in counseling. I need people to understand, when you have a counselor, it's confidential. The only time we disclose is if there is concern about your safety or somebody else's safety. And there are many counselors that weave in spiritual and Christian perspectives, but it's confidential. It's a safe place. So that's the piece I like, is a safe place. And Reverend Desiree Guyton stated, we begin to heal when we tell our stories in safe places. How can we assist pastors with identifying these safe spaces?
Well, it's interesting when if you see in the beginning of the book, I got yourself, I got Desiree, I got Phil, I got Dr. Wright. Everybody in the beginning of the book is counselors, because I really wanted to show, the reviewing of this book, that there's some mental health things, there's some challenges, there's some counseling, there's some deep, deep pain that needs to be dealt with. Right. And the reason I have, the counselors in the beginning of the book to show, like, there should not be a stigma on us having these safe places. And, and I believe every pastor has to have a pastor. Like, at no point are we meant to be on an island. Jesus had disciples had Jesus. Even in that, he had his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. Like, we got to have a inner circle, a safe place where we can share what we're going through, where we can pour that out. I in the book, like, I said, my wife is going to read some of these things for the first time in that book, because I protect her. I don't come home and make her my surrogate counselor. I don't come home and talk about who hurt me at church. I want her to be able to worship in spirit and truth, not go in there looking like, no, she didn't say something to my husband. Like, no, I don't want her to go there, mad at deacons and staff, no. So that's not the place for that. But, my pastor has been my pastor from day one. I love this dude. Like, I can talk to him about anything. My assistant pastor, Dr. Candy, we talk about everything. Like, we all day, we rapping about it. I can get a bad text and be like, dude, do you see this? Somebody say something at me at the door after Sunday, like, dude, guess what they said? So I don't hold it. I don't harbor it. It don't turn into bitterness. It doesn't haunt me. I let it out. I share it. We wrestle with it. We laugh about it. We pray about it, and we're able to let it go. When you don't have that outlet, it just continues to come back. It just continues to bottle up, as you said. And at some point, it's going to manifest itself. Either it's going to rip you up inside, or you're going to end up ripping somebody up outside, because it's going to explode on somebody else. And so you got to have a place, a person, an accountability system to handle the thing. You can't do this. I mean, look how many times Jesus had to just walk away and go pray to his daddy. Like, that they had that. He had to go do that. If Jesus had to leave the crowd and go talk to his daddy, who are we?
Absolutely.
To think that we can just take it on ourselves. Oh, we got it.
Yes.
Like, come on.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And so we talk about, if you hold it in, it can impact you physically, it can impact you spiritually. If the bottle is shook, the Pepsi bottle, and you take the lid off, it's going to explode on people you love, people you work with, your congregants. But here's the other thing. Put a Pepsi bottle, a Coke bottle, any pop or soda in the freezer, and it freezes. What's it going to do? It's going to, I'm from the Midwest. We say pop, but I live on the East now. People told me to say soda. So, but when you put it in the freezer, and it freezes, it still explodes. So it's either going to explode out on people or it's going to explode within you. And so I really appreciate, the pastor needs a pastor. We in the counseling profession says that even the counselor needs a counselor. And then even the pastor needs a counselor, and the counselor needs their pastor. I need my pastor. So that's how we can manage what's going on in the Pepsi bottle. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I put in my endorsement the use of deliberate self-disclosure in the therapeutic process. In this case, the therapeutic process was the book, The Pastor's Diaries, can have some real benefits, including building rapport with other pastors, reducing uneasy feelings of telling a stranger about your feelings, thoughts, and experiences, humanizing the pastor in other pastors' eyes, and showing that pastors are not alone in their struggle. How will this book and the self-disclosure benefit the church and the congregants?
Well, I when the Lord kind of birthed this in me, I really was trying to be sensitive to our pastors, be a friend to pastors, be an encouragement to pastors, let pastor's story be told. What I did not expect, which has happened since the book came out, is to see such a response from the congregation. There are so many, congregants, lay people, Christians who have come up to me since the book had been written and said, I owe my pastor an apology, who sat there and said, wow, I wonder if I was a cause of their pain. There's so many people, not from my church, but that said, wow, I had no idea this is what you went through, or this is what you guys felt like. And so for me, what's been the most surprising, overwhelming issue is that I thought I was writing it for pastors, but it seemed like it's the church who needed it even more. The church needed to realize that was a human in their pulpit. And the question is, do the church have any responsibility to care for their pastor? Do you think that the 1 day a year anniversary is enough to care for them? That individual needs respite. They need a vacation. They need to know that they can go away and you won't hold them in content for it, that they can relax, that they can take a Sunday off, that they can breathe, that they can be human. They need that same grace and mercy that they give. And so I think for me, it's seeing the humanity of who we are. And again, I guess we did such a great job of faking the game and hiding it, because there's so many who came like, yo, this was so eye-opening. And so many people told me that they cried while they read this, like they literally wept as they read it because they had no clue. And that tells me like, wow, we are doing a horrible job in being transparent, because if it's so alarming and so shocking what's in here, it means we are really hiding things from the very ones that we are spending and doing life with.
Yes. So I guess I have a two-part question. How do we, using this book and other methods, how do we help our congregants with understanding that our pastors are human? That's the first part. And then what do we need to do a better job of in seminary when it comes to training on mental health and wholeness?
Well, I think, and again, back to our culture thing, we being African Americans, I think we more than anybody else put our pastors up on pedestals. And it's like a chicken and the egg. You put us on a pedestal, and now we got to pretend to be on a pedestal that you put us on, right? Or we got to do our best to stay on the pedestal that you put us on. Now, some of us expect a pedestal because that's the culture. And I think, education, that pedestal, man, that's like shackles, like lifting me up, as something greater than a servant of the Lord is going to only lead to a bad situation. Like it doesn't end well, So I think communicating about the pressures that come along with that, the pain, as I talked about, the power. Like we have to educate on people. Like when you walk in, just because they named you pastor, don't really mean you the pastor. You just got the title. You don't have the relational equity or experience with them to be able to move them. Right? You don't have that influence. You're just right now the name only. How do you move in that? So I think an education needs to take place with us leading as well as the body. And so we have to go, communicate that. But again, we got to be transparent in that communication. But I think having communication, talking about it, that's what I hope. I hope that, this book, sparks some real conversation about what it really takes to do this. Because, as a reason why some, leave the ministry. They say you only last 5 years. There's a reason why there's such turnover. You get in this and you so blown away that it was, so difficult that it can be so deep and dark and just depressing that you just run away from it. Others, you've only been trained to do one thing. And so you stay much longer than you should have in an unhealthy place, because like, what else can I do? And so I stay. I don't like the people. I don't like the church. But this is all I can do. And I think that's horrible as well. So I think, just being transparent enough, having great communication, communicating about what you're actually dealing with and going through. And then again, like we talked about, having accountability matrix to really talk about these things and equip one another with these things, I think is important.
I really like that. And I just thought of this question with you saying this. So this is not on our original list, but we can talk about this because with the issues that have come out in this book and being transparent and being vulnerable and having these conversations, how do you respond to another pastor or a congregant that says, I don't need to talk about this. I don't need a counselor. I just need to pray about it.
There is value. I don't minimize prayer. But if it was just praying, God wouldn't have gave us one another, right? He gives us a body. As iron sharpens iron, so one sharpens another. He gives us to bear one another burdens. He gives us the scriptures to tell us how we ought to interact, how we ought to uplift one another and hold one another up in this process. So this idea that is just between me and God, I love, that is your relationship with the Lord, but you got to live that out with people, and so it's how do you engage people? And if you don't come down off the mountain like Moses with the answer, then you're going to keep going back up on that mountain. And so the truth is we hear from the Lord and we talk about, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm dealing with, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm experiencing, how do I walk this out in a way, because for me, the end is always in mind. I want to hear well done, right? So I don't want to do anything that's going to derail my journey, my walk. I always think about at the end of the day, when I'm laid out in front of somebody's church, I don't want nobody to be able to walk in there and say, dude did me dirty, dude did me wrong, dude, like, you can't speak ill of me, right? And so how do I walk this out? If it was up to me and I didn't have the accountability matrix, I'd probably say something, that I should not have. And so, yeah, I believe that, prayer is great. Prayer is important. Prayer is a part of my daily life, but God gave us one another to continue to interact and work that thing out.
Yes. And, one of the things that I have been trying to put out there, one of my colleagues, he and his wife created a shirt that says, I pray, I'd speak to God, but I also see a therapist. There's another shirt that says God and therapy together. So we need to start saying that these things are together and they can go together for that wellness and that wholeness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes remaining. So if you have questions, I see comments. Everybody is saying extremely insightful and healing. Amen. The book is a wake-up call. Yes, we do need to care for our pastors. The body needs this and the pastors need this. So if you have specific questions, please put those in the chat box. Those of you on Zoom, please use the chat box. But as we're waiting for any questions to come in, I wanted to mention Dr. Anderson serves on the board chairman for community forgiveness and restoration. And what really stuck out for me was the forgiveness piece. And what role does forgiveness play in these pastors sharing their stories? And what role does forgiveness play?
Well, I don't think you can share your story if you can't embrace God's grace, right? Now, the reality, we can all quote, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. He who claims to be without sin is a lie and the truth. Like we can quote it, but the reality is sometimes when we err, we can't admit that we err and we don't accept the very grace that God gives. Right. And so we judge ourselves and we don't forgive ourselves. And because we don't forgive ourselves, we can't share what's going on. You know, we haven't gotten past it because we haven't forgiven ourselves. I mean, when I deal with community forgiveness and restoration, you know, I had to come face to face that I really believe in forgiveness. I met an individual who was incarcerated doing a triple life sentence. I asked him, how does one get triple life? He said, I took 3 lives. I'm like, oh, like, I mean, this guy's singing on the choir at Greaterford. You know, I met him post Christ. I mean, he had accepted Christ 20 years ago. So I don't know the guy who took 3 lives. I met this guy. And the guy that I met was a very kind, gentle, God-loving man. I went to court on his behalf and I heard the things that he did. And I sat there and I had to be like, oh my God, wait, he killed somebody's grandma? Wait, he just shot, like, wait, he did, like, he robbed, oh. And I'm listening. And then all of a sudden I'm like, how can I now have a relationship with him knowing what he did? And the Lord arrested me right in there, like, do you believe in my forgiveness or not? Do you believe that the blood covers or not?
Right.
Because I'm sitting there like, I'm sitting here in court with somebody who just done some heinous crimes in their life, things that just like, no, you're bad. You were really bad. Like right. I've never been with nobody who was like that. And I'm like, wow, can God's grace and forgiveness really work in a person's life? And that right there opened my eyes up to say, well, who don't you forgive? What you've been holding. If God can forgive that, then what can't we forgive? Who are we not to forgive? You know, because sometimes I think we look at our own stuff and some of us like, oh, I ain't do that much, you know, stop. You know, we have and we've done and God's forgiven. And I think part of our problem as a body is our lack of forgiveness with one another. Absolutely. And especially in a pastor's life, right. You're hiding so much because you fear that nobody's going to forgive you. Yes. If you tell them this or that or the other.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about if God forgives, why can't we forgive? And Everett Worthington, who is one of my favorite psychologists that weaves in spiritual and Christian perspectives, he says there's 3 parts to forgiveness. First, there's the cognitive piece. Just being willing to say, I forgive. Just because you say it doesn't mean your emotions catch up. So you have to allow your emotions to catch up. The second part of forgiveness is forgiving ourselves and forgiving others unconditionally, just like God forgives us and still loves us. And then once you cognitively say, I forgive, allowing the emotions to catch up. And there's no timeline on that in terms of the emotions. But I have a picture that's a fish hook. And on this fish hook is the person who's in pain and the person who caused the pain. And it basically says, in order to let yourself off the hook, you have to forgive. You can't wait for the other person to let you off the hook. And that goes back to that pain internally, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
We have a question. Philip Davis asked, how do pastors break the silence?
Like this. Like this. No, seriously, I don't know, how transparent you want, somebody to be. And again, it has to be safe. You have to do it in a place where somebody can show you that grace, show you that love, show you that forgiveness. I think the silence is being broken. I think we walk through the keep it real era where sometimes folks think being transparent is just saying whatever you want. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being honest about pain. I know there's people who I wish I seen on Sunday who I no longer see. And I can say that, and I know it hurts for that to happen. To say that, I done came to church to preach with a cold, with diarrhea, feeling sick after a late night, and then you come in and you realize that somebody else didn't come because it started drizzling. I get mad about that. like and we need to say like, yo, I was hurt because y'all didn't show up for something. I'm hurt. Y'all don't show up for Bible study. I'm hurt. Y'all don't show up for prayer. Like it hurts when y'all don't do that. It hinders us as a body. And saying it instead of just brushing it off like, oh, them people just don't come or these people don't do it. Let them know, yo, it hurts. And I think that's how we have to share that these things, hurt. When we go through this, share. Hey, look, I know y'all, there's a lot of pressure. I hope this vision works. This is what I believe the Lord is leading me. But if it doesn't, then God bless. We gave it a shot, and it's okay. You know what I mean? We don't have to do a fifth annual. The fourth annual was horrible. Don't do a fifth annual. Let's call it a night and keep it moving. But they got to have a place that they can do that, where they can break the silence and know that people care enough about them, and they're not just a talking head. They're not the break glass and emergency person, but they're actually a human being who I'm gonna give them an opportunity to talk.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, you might hear my little dog. He's ready to go outside. He says, I've been at this computer long enough. So one of the things I appreciate people sharing and being transparent in the chat. Thank you very much. Somebody put Dr. Laura Renee Hubbard, who's one of our experts on forgiveness. She says, our wills to forgive can function regardless of the temperature of our hearts. And that quote comes from Corrie ten Boom. And so this whole idea of forgiveness is a part of this. Doc, this has been really good, and I wish we had more time. We could do some breakout groups and have small groups discussions. But as we come to an end, we have 5 minutes. Is there anything you would like to say about the book, the pastor sharing that you have not talked about, anything about this topic of bridging the gap between faith and mental health that we have not talked about?
Well, I think if you're a pastor listening to this, I think, I'm not just trying to sell books. I think you really need to get it. I think you'll see some aspect of your story in there, and I hope you're encouraged by that. I hope you can read it and share it. And if you're a member, I think you need to read it just so you can have a better awareness of how do I love on a person that's been called to love on me. I think it's for the whole body. I think it's something that we need to share with one another, open up that dialogue, open up that communication. I've been asked by a group of individuals, can we get a volume 2? Because they have a story to tell. I've been asked by my wife, when am I going to do the pastor's wives' diaries? I've been approached by a film director of asking, can we make the pastor's diary a docuseries? So there's a whole lot of buzz and conversation that's taking place that's going to push this further. I look at this like one of those independent movies that it got to spread by word of mouth. I was working with a traditional publisher and they wanted the book, but they wanted me to write the whole thing. And I really wanted these other voices. I didn't want it to be the Larry Anderson story. I wanted these other voices to be heard, so that it could be validated, this experience that we're all walking through. And so I think for our bodies to be healthy, we need to have an awareness of what one another is going through and what one another is feeling, and help bring some closure to some of the things that's going on, some healing to some of the things that's going on. I want to see depression decrease. I want to see addiction decrease, divorce decrease, suicide decrease. I'm hoping that these things go down because the conversation is turned up.
I think that's phenomenal. That's excellent. And I'll say this again, we got to have these conversations. Mental health is an equal opportunity. We all have mental health. Mental illness is an equal opportunity illness. It does not discriminate based on race and ethnicity. Same thing with suicide or denomination. So we have to talk about it. The research shows that 1 in 5 adults, US adults 18 or over, suffer from a diagnosable mental illness. And we're talking about adults today, but we also need to understand our children can suffer from mental illness. 1 in 6 children ages 6 years old to 17 suffer from a diagnosable mental illness. So we need to have these conversations. The other thing is that I want to mention that safe place, whether you go to a psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, or licensed marriage and family therapist, we all have codes of ethics. We are bound to keeping our sessions confidential, and we are trained to provide a relationship. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so it's finding that right therapist, that counselor, that you can be open and vulnerable and transparent. So thank you very much for sharing this information about the books. One last question. Is there contact information on the Community Forgiveness and Restoration group? That's the first thing. And then how can people contact you and get your book?
Okay, Community Forgiveness and Restoration, go on the website, go to CFR.com, Community Forgiveness and Restoration. You'll find out information there and how to connect with us there. The Pastor's Diaries is everywhere books are sold. You can go to www.pastorsdiaries.com or Amazon or wherever you like to buy books. But if you want to get in contact with me or hear more about the book and what's happening, book signings, things like that, then it's www.pastorsdiaries.com.
All right, Doc. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I do want to share our topics for the next couple months. First of all, my guest, Donovan Darius, who is a motivational speaker and a retired NFL player for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was to be my guest in October. I ask that those of you, please keep him in prayer. His mother just passed away this past week. And then in November, Dr. Thema Bryant, she is the president-elect of the American Psychological Association. And we are going to continue that conversation. And for October 18th, if I need to get a new guest, it will still be on the topic of bridging the gap between faith, mental health, and sports. So thank you all for joining us live tonight. Thank you for those of you that will watch this after the fact, because it will be on Facebook Live, it will be on YouTube. Dr. Anderson will have access on his page as well. So I appreciate those of you that will be watching this. Thank you all for joining us tonight. God bless you, and I'll see you next month.